Hey everybody, my name is John DePietro, and you know what? I spent a lot of time in the wonderful, wild, wacky world of radio. And during that time at WTAG, where you can see the logo in the background, I got to work with a very interesting program director who came to us in the late 80s. His name is Mark Edwards. And the interesting part about Mark Edwards is that he, although it probably doesn't show up in the history books, he's one of the guys that gave Rush Limbaugh his early chance at national stardom. And Mark is joining us today. Mark, welcome back to the studio.
Oh, thank you, my friend. Always a pleasure to hang with you, and thank you for having me.
Right. And we should say we're not really in a studio because there's nobody that hangs around studios anymore, because radio stations are pretty much ghost towns these days. Everybody's broadcasting from home, and you and I are doing the same thing today. But when I got word recently, actually just less than 24 hours ago, that Rush had passed, the first person whose name came to mind was yours. Now, I know you kind of take offense. And what was your response to me when I said you were the first person I thought of?
I can't say that to an audience of strangers. That would be wrong.
Well, you told me, I'll paraphrase it in G-rated terms, is that it's nice to be thought of as the first person when somebody else dies.
Yes, that is what I said. Yeah.
Right. And my response to
morbid,
you was,
thank you.
Just as smart back to you, saying, well, look, at least you're not the person that died that we're thinking about. So
this is true.
Very true. With that being said, we should probably move on. But in 1988, do I have the year correct?
Yeah, it was 1988 when we brought him on.
Right. You were the guy at WTAG, which was Worcester's news leader at the time and was owned by the Knights.
Yep, Night Quality Station
was a Night Quality Station back before consolidation and the whatever you want to call it of radio. Tell me what made you, as a program director, well, first of all, tell us what a program director is, because for those folks that are watching this that are not intimately involved with the inside workings of radio, what is a program director? And then we can go from there.
Okay. Program director's job is to put things on the radio station. So anything you hear on a radio station or even a TV station is the fault or responsibility or brilliant move of the program director. That's kind of where the buck stops for everything you hear. So in Worcester, my job was to try to get the radio station kind of turned around a little bit, take away some bad habits as we had new ownership, and get the best programming on the air to generate ratings, which then lets guys like you sell advertising and makes money for everybody.
So basically, you were in a situation that if things were going well, ratings wise and everything else, you kind of took credit for it. And if they weren't going well, you could say, I haven't been here long enough to make my changes happen yet. Is that pretty much?
Yeah, that's pretty much
position?
It. Yeah. You can use that excuse for about 2 years, and then you're on your own.
Oh, 2 years. Now you get 2 books.
You get about 2 years now.
Now you get 2 weeks, and then
now you get 2 weeks. You're right. Yeah.
Right.
That was
but
different
back then, they at least used to fire you face to face. Today, you read about it in a tweet.
Yeah.
But anyway, let's not digress about the current state of radio compared to what it was. But what was it as a program director that caught your attention to say, you know what, I'd like this guy on my radio station? 3 hours of my airwaves. What caught your attention?
Well, first of all, you have to put your personal feelings aside whenever you put something on the radio, whether you're doing a news talk station or you're doing a music station and you hear a song. You may not like it, but if your listeners like it, that's why you would put it on the air. Mm-hmm. And Rush had been on the air for just a couple of weeks before we put him on. And I had heard some demos, and I'd spoken to him and spoken to the gentleman who owned his show and was kind of pushing it around. And it was very clear to me that this guy had a really special gift in the way he communicated. I didn't personally agree with a lot of the stuff he said. And we were in Worcester, Massachusetts in 1988 when our governor was running for president. So Rush was very liberal, excuse the expression, at taking swipes at Governor Dukakis. So
Right.
it was definitely, not friendly necessarily to Massachusetts, but he was such a gifted and an amazing communicator that it was really clear to me that he belonged on our air, because he would be somebody who would get people's attention, get more listening to the station, and bring us higher ratings, which in the course of a very short amount of time, he did all those things.
Mm-hmm. Do you recall what type of programming that he replaced? Because there were some people saying, oh, WTAG was playing music then.
We were playing music in midday. The station, when I got there, was playing a lot of music throughout the day. And the morning show was music. The afternoon show was mainly music. And nights was talk, but middays we were playing music. So this just made more sense, because we weren't really getting any ratings to speak of with the music programming. And people on AM were listening for talk and for things they could interact with. So putting a talk show on the air just made the most sense.
And back then there was a huge news team. So adding a news topic certainly wasn't, revolutionary or out of the ordinary.
No, not at all.
Really gave you more.
It was a current events-based show. We also had a medical show, which did very well, but a current events-based show, which was Rush, was perfect for the station.
Was that Dean Adele?
Yeah, Dr. Dean Adele.
And when was he on? Like 10 to noon or 9 to noon?
He was on the hour before Rush, I believe, or maybe the hour after. It's been a while, but he was on adjacent to Rush on one side of him. I don't remember which one. I think maybe it was the hour after.
Okay.
So he was part of the changes that we made to bring some more talk programming that our listeners would care about to the station.
Right. And was Bruce Williams doing nights then?
Bruce was doing nights, followed by Sally Jesse Raphael, and then there was a third show that kind of changed a few times. But yeah, we were talk again from like 7 at night until I think 5 in the morning.
Okay. So tell our audience how shows get shopped. How do you get contacted? And was it a Scott Knight, Norman Knight decision, or was it a Mark Edwards decision, or was it a combo of that? But how did you become aware of the Rush Limbaugh show availability?
I had gotten a call from the people who owned a show, and they came to me, and we had talked for a few weeks even before the show launched, and I wanted to actually hear the show, so we let it launch before we took it on. But they came to me, and I then took the concept of the show and sold it to the owners, and they kind of thought the same way I did, that maybe it's not the kind of thing that I personally would listen to, but we know that the listeners would love it and would respond to it. And I would say that that in the end they gave me blessing, but also said it's on you if it doesn't work. And I took that responsibility.
And it did work.
Yeah, it did work. It was pretty ugly at the beginning, I'm not going to lie, between people saying, "Where's my music?" and people saying, "I hate what this guy's talking about." But then they would also tell me everything he said for the entire 3 hours of the show. So, okay, you may hate him, but you're listening to the whole show. And, over time, I got to know Rush, and he talked about how the people who loved him listened, and the people who hated him listened more. And he was right. I mean, it was something that really got people fired up on both sides. And the show was at that point much less caustic than it became over time, but it was still, very pointed as a very right-leaning conservative talk show.
Now, Dukakis did lose that election.
Yeah, by a few votes.
To who was it?
I believe that was Bush.
Okay, and then Bush lasted one term.
Yeah.
And then Clinton came in.
Correct.
And a lot of people were saying, oh, well, wait a minute. At that 92 election cycle, that Rush isn't going to have a show because Clinton won. And as it turned out, historically, that gave him his rocket ship to fame. Would you agree?
Yeah, Clinton being in the White House is what really kind of launched him, as people were not happy about Clinton being in the White House. They knew what he was about, but it became easier for him to criticize the guy who was in the White House that wasn't in his party. So it helped him really kind of turbo and get on more stations and get more listeners on the stations he was already on. So he was able to, really grow in the Clinton years, and he had 8 years to do it. So it was a very productive time for him, and the show continued to grow in Worcester. I left in 1989, but the show continued to grow after that, and is still doing very well to this day.
Right. And as people look back on it now, well, let me ask you, did you get calls in that next year that you were there? Did you get calls from other PDs around the country saying, hey, should I bring this guy on? Were you used as a reference?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the number of program directors in radio, even back then, was very small. Now you can count them on, both hands. But a number of guys who I knew called me and asked me if I'd lost my mind. Some other people called and said, well, what's the deal on this guy? And the people who were syndicating Rush's show would also, use my name as a reference. Rush talked about WTAG on the air fairly often during the presidential campaign, just because he didn't have a Boston affiliate. And I think right before, or closely before the election, he picked up Fall River. But the big Massachusetts affiliate he had was us, and WTAG signal covered a lot of ground. So he would definitely incite the people in central Massachusetts by mentioning WTAG and mentioning the fact that we love Dukakis for the entire broadcast day except his show, and make other accusations.
Except his show. And as you look back now, in reality, if Bush had won another term, the public wants conflict, right? They don't want to listen to agreement. It's like people that watch Fox that hate Republicans, they expect to see conflict. And people who watch CNN and don't like their end of it, they're expecting conflict. And in reality, regardless of whether you call it news or not, you're still competing with entertainment vehicles for your listenership. And evidently Rush was able to combine that, almost like the WWF of radio.
Well, Rush's show was entertainment, and he was smart enough to understand that he took concepts that he believed in, but took them and blew them up in an entertainment kind of style to make it more bombastic and more exciting than just talking about the subject. Now, that was at the beginning. As time went on, he began to believe his own stuff, and it became a little bit less tongue-in-cheek and a little more, serious talk. But at the beginning, it was certainly take these concepts, blow them up, make them get people's attention, and make them entertaining. So yeah, it was a news show, and yeah, he had a lot of news people, but he was definitely a showman and understood the P.T. Barnum school of putting on programs.
Exactly.
And
you know what? And you and I are going to talk about things that today that are different than what you're hearing on the mainstream media, because of the fact that we knew the situation way back when. And in reality, when Rush was doing lines like with talent on loan from God, now people are quoting it. Now that he's gone, they're quoting it and saying, oh, God really did put him on earth. But that was his Ringling Brothers line.
Yeah, exactly. That was just taking everything he did and, turning it up to 11, taking a cue from my friends at Spinal Tap, turning it up to 11. And that was totally what he did. Now, again, you do it for a long time, and Rush certainly had some issues, some personal issues and some other things as time went on. But you get to the point where you believe it. And up until President Trump started in office, I think he was really believing it. He then kind of, backed off a little bit on some of the things he was doing. And the last 4 years changed everybody's use and presentation in media and what people listened to and believed in and what they wanted to hear. But, he started out as, I got the show and I don't know if it's going to work or not. I mean, we talked a lot about how we don't know if the show's going to work, but we're going to give it a shot because it was entertaining.
You talking with him?
Yeah, talking with him.
Correct.
And he was very kind to me all the way through his career. I would go up to, at the time he was doing a show from New York, go up to New York and hang out with him, during the show and afterwards. And, we talked about, we'll see how long this goes to see if it works or not. And he had a commitment to keep the show on the air long enough to let it develop or not. And it ended up developing, and he was, not taking it all that seriously, which, changed, because when you start making like real money and people think that you are a leader, you kind of begin to, believe all that stuff. So it was a different show and a different guy after, probably the mid 90s.
Yeah. But he didn't get the ego thing with you. He always remembered.
No, he was always very kind. I mean, all the way through, he was always very kind to me. And, he lived in the same town that my mom lives in. And, we communicated it on, as I was going down to see her, that, I wanted to drop by or say hi or whatever. And we talked on the phone, but not to his palatial mansion, because frankly, he was sick before he announced he was sick. And, no matter what, you've got to say it's a loss for anybody to pass away at 70 from lung cancer. My dad passed away at 72 from the same kind of lung cancer that Rush died from. And it's a really bad way to go. And, he just wasn't into, doing a lot more than his show for quite a while.
Yeah, exactly. Now, before you took the chance on it, well, let's state this very clearly. If you make a career in radio from the talent side of the business, you will be fired, whether it's whether it's justified or not. But part of quote unquote growing it in radio is you will be fired, because there are, I'm sure you'd agree now as we look back on it, there's some crazy people that are program directors, and they were crazy, and that's how they became program directors, because they're just like this industry. There are crazy people. I mean, they're crazier in TV, but they're not exposed as much because they cover themselves well. But how did you look at him as knowing he'd already been fired 4 or 5 times? Why should you take a chance with him? Even though you weren't quote unquote hiring him, but the public doesn't know you weren't hiring him.
Well, nobody's a man in broadcasting until you've been fired. And that goes for the women too. So it's not anything that I even thought about. He'd been fired from doing music shows, and he was doing really well in Sacramento when he got picked up for a national show. So, being fired, it just happens. And, I knew that, the worst thing that could happen is we put the show on for a year or a little bit longer, and we find another show to put in his place. And it turned out that he became, quite frankly, irreplaceable. And I think it's going to be interesting to see who gets that time slot and what stations choose to do with that time slot going forward.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Obviously, they had to keep them, with the replacement talent that was there, because it was still Rush's show.
It was still his show, right?
Let me go back for just a second.
Sure.
People think that he's only on that station. When I was at WTAG, people would call and say, I want to talk to Rush. At night, people would call SRS and want to talk to Delilah, but they don't realize that they're doing, so many stations at once, and they just put those little breakers in that say you're listening to the Rush Limbaugh show on WT, et cetera. Talk about how his program was sold, what the EIB actually was, or did it even exist except just in name?
Just a name. I mean, it was something that he came up with after the show had been on the air for a while, that, I'm practicing excellence in broadcasting. So it's the Excellence in Broadcasting Network. And, it was just another shtick, another bit that he did, like all the other, bits that had to do with music. He had stopped doing those after a while, but, other bits with songs to introduce them. And, some of the other things he said, he had different names for his call screeners and all this stuff that at the beginning was, fun and games. And later on, he became more serious. But his show was definitely an exercise in theater of the mind.
Theater of the mind.
And he did it better than anyone before him, for sure. And I think there's going to be a lot of posers. There are already a lot of posers and a lot of people who are trying to copy what he's done, but they can't.
Okay.
There's, those guys come around literally once in a lifetime.
It's a different era now. Kit Carson.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Well, it was one of his producers early on, and I don't know that he's been associated with the show since, but I know he was part of the New York crew. The show had gone through some different changes over the years and changed people working with Rush, and then he took the show down to Florida so he could be doing it from his basement, as basically now everyone's doing shows from their basements. But
not by choice.
That was just one of his folks who was around during the early days of the radio show, during the days of the TV show, which was on for a while, but they found they couldn't replicate the radio show on television, largely because they didn't have callers. And there's a lot more you can do when people aren't seeing you than you can do when you are in front of a camera. Yep. So the magic of what he did was in radio. Unlike Larry King, who basically just took his radio show and put it on TV,
right? Because
it was a straightforward show. Rush needed the radio to be able to pull some stunts with people's minds that he couldn't do on TV.
Yeah, and I went down, I don't know whether you were still there then, but we did get a chance to go down into New York City for the show. I brought a couple of clients with me, and he knew who you were, and he knew the radio station because it was probably, I don't know, early 90s or 89 or 9, somewhere around then. It was a while ago.
I think I may have been gone by then. So
but the TV show was like a series of 3 8-minute monologues with no interaction.
Right.
But the interesting part about his show that people don't understand is that, and unless it changed, he never had guests, right?
He got more into guests as time went on. It wasn't a daily occurrence. It was, again, he began to take himself a little bit more seriously. Yeah. And he would have, if he could get somebody big, even early on, like Speaker of the House or an important governor or somebody, he would have them on for a while with him because they were what we call a get. They were somebody, I got so-and-so that's really big. But his show wasn't about guests. Later on, it became a little bit more because they came to him looking for exposure. At the beginning, it was, your name was what? Rusty? What? They didn't know who he was, but, he was getting millions of listeners a week, quietly building an empire.
Mm. And when I say no guest, I don't mean to mix up callers with guests.
No, you're talking about actual featured guests.
The callers. And how about some of the euphemisms? Is that a right word? I don't even know what the heck euphemism means. But how about some of the Rush-isms that were developed, like feminazi and other phrases like that are probably all being played now, but weren't really thought of as much during that time.
No, I think a lot of that stuff has entered the lexicon. And, I have not listened to his show more than for maybe 10 minutes in probably 20 years. But I know that a lot of that stuff kind of backed away a little bit, but it made such an early impression on people that, terms like feminazis and homeless update, and he would do, blank update, whatever it may be. Homeless update, women update, whatever. He would just do that, find a piece of music to set it off, and then go and do his thing. And I don't think that carried on as much over time as he got more serious.
Mm. Like you said, it is going to be very interesting to see what the stations that were contractually obligated to the show, that's in all the guest hosts, when they came on, they weren't doing their show. They were trying to be as Rush as possible, Rush-ish as possible. It's really going to be interesting to see, especially the large groups that own the show, that buy the show, of what they do. Any names that you've seen coming forward?
No, there's, without getting too inside baseball, there's a lot of different contractual obligations that stations may have, and a lot of stations may have to carry the show for a certain amount of time, no matter who's hosting it, because of the deal they made. So they may be running whatever the network gives them for a while. Other stations may have the ability to dump the show and do something else, but there's not a lot of people who come anywhere close to what he was able to do. And I think in talk radio, in syndicated talk radio, the kind of shows you hear on a lot of stations, there'll be a lot of shows changing time slots and offering themselves up during what was Rush's time slot. But it's going to be a while before all this works itself out for various contractual and just, what's the best decision? Let's not do a knee-jerk kind of just reasons.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting because that 12 to 3 time period was sacred, and pretty much he was live during those hours. I don't know about the West Coast, but they must
not on the West Coast. If you carried him live on the West Coast, yeah, but a lot of stations would delay the show to run after the morning
delay, because those last few years when I was sitting in for Jordan Levy from 3 to 6. Rush would be on from 12 to 3, and I'd get to the station about 1:30, and I'd always be listening to see what they were talking about, to see if there's anything that I could pick up from. But boy, he made a fortune with endorsements. And he was doing endorsements before endorsements weren't at, every radio group now has endorsements so that they don't have to pay their talent on their own.
Yeah, but let's not forget the king of endorsements was Paul Harvey, who started doing them in the 50s and did them for his entire career. So Rush wasn't the first. He may have been the best next to Paul Harvey at doing endorsements, but that's how that's how he managed to make that $400 million a year that he was making at the end.
Was that what it was?
Yeah, that's how you get a lot of that money.
Yeah. So anyway,
I know that's the kind of money you make now, but
exactly. It's pocket change for me. That's why that's why I didn't bring it up, because I didn't think it was significant. But we want to thank you so much for taking time from your busy day to talk about the early days of Rush Limbaugh. And I guarantee you, this subject matter that we went over today, it's not on CNN, it's not on Fox, it's not going to be on even any of the stations that he was on, because most of the guys that are ladies and gentlemen that are in radio today weren't there. They weren't even in the some weren't even born, but they weren't even in the industry when Rush got going. So
he got going 32 years ago, give or take. And
yeah, exactly.
That's a lifetime for a lot of these people who are trying to be Rush. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But agree or disagree, the thing is that there won't be another talent like his probably ever. And those who got to hear him, again, agree or disagree, you were getting a master class in performance. And he was great for that, if nothing else.
Great. So with that being said, this is John DePietro along with Mark Edwards.
That's me.
Mark, close it. Go back to your radio days and close this show for me.
Got to have the microphone.
Oh, okay.
So there you go. And you've been listening to John DePietro along with yours truly, Mark Edwards, on the John DePietro Video Experience. Ladies and gentlemen, please don't forget to like and favorite and subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much.
Have a great day, everybody.